I caught her at 7:14 in the morning, 3 weeks before I understood what it meant. She was standing at the window across the courtyard, second floor, the one with the slightly bent blind on the left side, and she was watching me. Not glancing, not passing through the frame on her way to something else. Standing, still, looking at me the way people look at something they've been thinking about for a while. When I turned and our eyes locked through the glass, she didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She held it for a full 2 seconds, unhurried, calm, almost daring, and then the blind moved, and she was gone. I stood on my balcony for another moment with a coffee cup I'd forgotten to drink from. The reasonable thing would have been to think nothing of it. People look out windows. Windows face courtyards. Courtyards have people in them. This is how buildings work. What actually happened was that I went inside, set the coffee down on the wrong counter, and spent the next 4 minutes staring at the bent blind like it owed me an explanation. It didn't occur to me, at the time, that she had been the one waiting for me to look first. My name is Daniel Holt. I am 34 years old. I work in architectural drafting, not the glamorous end, mostly structural annotation and compliance review, and I have lived in apartment 2C of the Meridian building for 2 years. My furniture is either IKEA or inherited. My kitchen smells like coffee permanently. I own one plant, a stubborn pothos named Nothing, that I water erratically and that continues to survive out of what I can only assume is spite. I am not a man who stares at windows. Her name was Nadia Voss. She lived in 3B directly across the courtyard, which I had known in the abstract since I moved in, but had never turned into an actual fact until 6 months ago when she knocked on my door to tell me my hallway light had been flickering for 3 days, and she found it distracting. She had a phone in one hand and a pen tucked behind her ear that she clearly had no memory of putting there, and she said this as though reporting a minor building violation, calm and precise, like a woman who had rehearsed the neutrality of the sentence before delivering it. I told her I'd call maintenance. She said good, turned, and went back up the stairs. That was the whole of it. 6 months of shared courtyard, shared hallway, shared entryway, and the sum total of our relationship was one building maintenance complaint delivered with professional efficiency and zero apparent interest in whether I had a name. She was a freelance copy editor. I knew this because the building's mailroom was small, and we had overlapped twice, and the return addresses on her packages were from publishers and literary agencies, and she carried the specific focused expression of someone who spends most of their time in their head looking for mistakes. Her prop, the thing I would come to know the way you know a landmark, was a small navy notebook she kept in her left jacket pocket, slightly too thick for the pocket, with a navy elastic around it. I never once saw her write in it while I was watching. It was simply always there, present, like punctuation. The courtyard was the thing neither of us could avoid. My desk faced the window. Her kitchen faced the courtyard. We were, through no fault of either of our own choosing, permanent fixtures in each other's peripheral vision. I had accommodated this by simply not thinking about it. She had apparently accommodated it by occasionally stopping to look. I told myself I was overthinking it. People zone out. Windows are just walls with light in them. That is hiding with better branding. 3 days after the window incident, I was out on the balcony again, this time actually drinking the coffee, when I noticed the bent blind was open a fraction. Not dramatically. Just a sliver, enough to see that there was someone on the other side of it. I did not look away. She didn't either. It lasted maybe 8 seconds, which is a long time to make eye contact with someone across a courtyard, and about 7 seconds longer than is socially comfortable. Then she disappeared into the back of the room, and I stood there feeling like I had just failed to understand the last line of a poem I'd otherwise followed perfectly. She was doing this deliberately. Or she was not, and I was building architecture out of coincidence, which is something I do professionally and have been known to do personally. I set the coffee down and went back inside and tried to think about building compliance codes for the rest of the afternoon, which worked poorly. The third time it happened, it was raining. I was standing at my kitchen window washing a single mug at 8:30 in the evening. I have efficient dishes. When I looked up, and she was there. 3rd floor, slightly to the left of center, the bent blind fully raised. She was wearing something dark. She was looking directly at me. She was not pretending she wasn't. I raised one hand. A small wave. Nothing committed. She looked at the wave. Then she looked back at me. Then she lowered the blind completely, and the window went dark. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time after that. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. I saw her in the mailroom 4 days later, and what happened was that we both arrived at the same moment, made brief eye contact, and then spent the following 90 seconds engaged in the most elaborate mutual pretense of casualness I have ever participated in. She sorted through a package with great focus. I checked a piece of mail I had already read. The air in the mailroom had the specific quality of a room in which two people are emphatically not addressing something. She said, "The hallway light is still a little inconsistent." Without looking up. I said, "I'll follow up." Also without looking up. She nodded once, picked up her package, and left. I stood in the mailroom for a moment. I have poor survival instincts around precise women. My friend Marcus, who I am required to maintain by the terms of our 15-year friendship, invited himself over the following Saturday to watch a game neither of us particularly cared about. He arrived, dropped onto my couch, accepted a beer, and within 11 minutes had noticed me glancing toward the courtyard-facing window. "What's out there?" he said. "The courtyard. You've looked at it 4 times. It's a large courtyard." He turned and looked at the window, then looked back at me with the expression of a man who has just assembled a piece of furniture and found he has a leftover bolt he can't account for. "Is there a person in that window?" I said nothing. He said, "There is a person in that window. She lives across the courtyard." I took a long drink of my beer. Marcus took an equally long drink of his, with the specific satisfaction of a man who has just found the leftover bolt and knows exactly where it goes. We watched the game. He said nothing else about it, which was somehow more unbearable than if he had. At halftime, without looking away from the television, he said, "You should probably do something about that." "About the window. About what's happening in the window," he said. "There's a difference." I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "I know." She knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening. I want to be precise about this because the sequence matters. It was 7:45 p.m. It was already dark, and I had been sitting at my desk annotating a floor plan and not thinking about the window at all. Which was true only in the technical sense that I was not actively thinking about it in the 5 seconds before the knock, and had been thinking about it with medium to high frequency and all the time leading up to those 5 seconds. I opened the door. She was holding her Navy notebook in one hand, pen in the other, and she had the look of a woman who had decided to do something and was currently committed to not reversing that decision, regardless of incoming information. "I have a question," she said. I said, "Okay, it's not about the hallway light." "Good," I said. I was going to have to admit I haven't followed up on that. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile. The forerunner of a smile, moving through the system, being held at customs. She looked down at her notebook and then back up. "The window," she said. I waited. "I know you've noticed." "Yes," I said, because there was no useful version of denying it. She held my gaze. "I wasn't going to stop until you looked back." She said it simply. Like a fact, she'd decided to stop organizing around. I don't know what that means, exactly. I know it's not nothing. The hallway was very quiet. I felt something in my chest do the specific thing it does when a sentence lands in a room and changes the weight of the air in it. I stood in my doorway and looked at a woman who had been watching me from a window for 3 weeks and had now chosen, with complete deliberateness, to tell me so. I said, "Do you want to come in?" She looked at me. Then she looked at the notebook she was still holding. Then she looked at me again, and this time she didn't look away quickly. "I think so," she said. Like the sentence had been sitting behind her teeth for a while, and had simply stopped being containable. She came in. We sat at my kitchen table with the coffee I made badly, and she accepted politely. And what happened over the following 2 hours was not a confession so much as a careful dismantling of a very well-constructed mutual pretense. She talked about the courtyard the way people talk about a thing they've been watching for longer than they'll admit. She said she'd noticed me moving around my apartment at odd hours. She said she'd told herself it was coincidence, and then that it was curiosity, and then that she'd run out of accurate words for it, and had simply kept looking. I said I had noticed she kept looking. She said she knew. I said I hadn't known what to do about it. She looked at me directly. "Neither did I," she said. "That's why I knocked." I set my coffee down. "I looked back," I said. "Every time." She was quiet for a moment. She ran her thumb along the elastic of the notebook, which I would later understand was the thing she did when she was thinking something she hadn't yet decided to say. "I know," she said. "I counted. That landed." I looked at her across the kitchen table, at the pen still tucked behind her ear, at the notebook she'd been holding for 2 hours without opening, and I felt the entire preceding 3 weeks reorganize themselves into a shape I should probably have seen much earlier. Every window, every 8-second eye contact across the courtyard, every mailroom silence. All of it had been a conversation conducted in the one language neither of us had to risk anything to speak. I said, "I'd like to not do this through windows anymore." She looked at me for a long moment. Her thumb went still on the elastic. "That would be acceptable," she said, and this time the smile made it all the way through. I should tell you about the first time I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, because the way she went still, not with surprise, but with the specific stillness of someone receiving something they have been careful not to want too loudly, told me something about her I couldn't have known from watching her sort mail or report hallway lighting deficiencies. She went still the way careful people go still when something they hoped for is actually happening. Then her fingers turned and held mine back, and that was the whole of it. And it was sufficient. Her sister texted at that exact moment, 5 successive messages in fast succession, the phone buzzing against the table like an impatient witness, and we both looked at it and then at each other, and Nadia said, "She has terrible timing," and I said, "Historically," and she laughed properly then, the kind of laugh that has no performance in it, and I understood that whatever I had been looking at from across the courtyard had only ever been the edited version. This was better. 2 months later, she moved the bent blind on purpose. I know this because she told me, one evening on my balcony, with coffee I had improved significantly through instruction and practice, that she had noticed it was bent on her second week in the building and had decided to leave it because it let in a specific angle of morning light she preferred. Then she looked at me sideways and added, "and because it gave me a reason to stand there." I said, You didn't need a reason. I know that now, she said. We had developed by then a shorthand that operates below the threshold of words. She puts the notebook on my kitchen table when she comes over, which means she is staying. I make 2 coffees without being asked, which means I noticed. She rearranges whatever is on my counter to be more organized, which means she is comfortable. I leave the balcony door open on good mornings, which means I am hoping she'll come over before either of us has had to commit to a plan. These are small languages. They are precise in the way she is precise, easy in the way I had always wanted things to be. I am still bad at remembering to water the pothos. She waters it without mentioning it. It has become, in the past few months, genuinely and somewhat aggressively healthy. I blame her. She accepts this. A year later, when people ask how we met, I say, we're neighbors. Which is true the way most useful answers are true. Factually complete and deliberately insufficient. She says, he looked back. And then doesn't elaborate, because she knows I know the rest, and she has always had a writer's understanding of when a sentence is finished. What I know, and did not know at the time of the first window, is that she had been trying to find the courage to knock on my door for 6 weeks before she did. 6 weeks of standing in the frame with the bent blind half open, waiting for some evidence that what she thought might be happening was something she hadn't invented. 6 weeks of mailroom proximity and hallway near misses, and the specific discipline required to carry a feeling in a coat pocket, the way she carries that notebook. Present at all times. Never opened where it could be read. What she knows, and what I tell her when she asks, is that I looked back every time. That the first morning I turned and found her there, I went back inside and couldn't explain to myself why I was smiling. That for 3 weeks I stood at that kitchen window at 7:14 a.m. with a cup of coffee and hoped she was on the other side of the bent blind. Nothing about this had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. I didn't fall in love with Nadia Voss the morning I caught her watching. I fell in love with her because she knocked on my door. Because she stood in the hallway holding a notebook she hadn't opened and told me the truth without dressing it up as anything else. Because she is someone for whom honesty is not courage exactly, it is just the cleanest solution to a problem. And she is a woman who prefers clean solutions. The bent blind is still bent. She says she'll fix it. I have stopped believing her. The morning light comes through at exactly the angle she described, and she was right. It is a good angle. It is very good. What would you have done if you realized someone had been watching you from across the courtyard, waiting for you to look back? And have you ever loved someone for so long in silence that the moment they finally said something out loud, you had to stop and remind yourself that it was real? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.